G'day guys, Tim here, the guy in the hat from Beat the Reset, coming to you from Vienna. And this is a really important video because I wanted to talk to you about the silver price. We watched through the evening silver running at around about $1 nearly every hour to the upside. This is absolutely astonishing. We've never really seen silver do this before. We've seen bull runs on silver, but we've never really seen anything like what we just witnessed. Now, it took a long time for silver to reach 50 USD. In fact, 50 odd years or so, give or take a couple of minor points where it hit the USD $50 mark, but we more or less over 50 years watched silver moving in that time to 50 USD. Now we see silver jump 2x within a couple of months, not even a couple of months. And we have just watched it today run 10% to the upside in just one day. This is the reprice of silver that we have been waiting for. This is a remarkable time to be in this commodity, and the great fear for me is that people were not positioned in this asset at the right time. Now, people have said to me, well, is it too late to get into silver? The answer is, of course it's not too late. Silver has a mile to run here. It is one of the most undervalued of all assets on the planet, and it still is to this very day. I mean, silver is majorly underpriced. The four things we look for in monetary assets is we look for, number one, is it undervalued? Yes. Number two, does it have a zero counterparty risk? In other words, you don't have to ask anybody's permission to use this. Number three, is it decentralized? And number four, my favorite of all, is it monetary? I mean, this is one of the big ones. Is silver a monetary asset? And absolutely, a lot of people say it's the poor sister of gold, but throughout history, and I've written about this in my second book called The Great Asset Shift, which was all about silver, we have watched silver come under enormous manipulation, especially on the ETF markets, and especially with the paper trades. We have watched it reach 400 to 1 in some instances. In other words, 400 pieces of paper sold to every ounce of silver on the planet. And this begs the question that what happens when we have a serious short on silver? Well, guess what happens? It happens what is happening right now. You are going to watch countries like Japan sending debt back to the US. You're going to see China losing confidence in long-term bonds and the ability for the US government to actually pay out and deliver on their bond. You're also going to see countries like Germany request the repatriation of about 15 to 1600 1.6 tons or 1.5 tons of gold bullion to be returned in, what we believe to be, 3 Boeing 747 loads of gold to be brought back to Germany, to the mainland, so that they can vault it. Because at the moment, Germany has about a third of its gold vaulted in US vaults, but they are losing confidence. And of course, Donald Trump has done himself no favors. He has been, of course, running around the globe and sanctioning anything that moves, including countries like China. Now, China's had an adverse reaction to that and said, well, you're not getting any more silver. That's the end of it, which leads Mexico as the next obvious choice to get silver. And we have some serious silver shorts going on the globe. The other problem for the US, of course, is that Donald Trump has, of course, gone after Venezuela. He recently offered to purchase Greenland, which, of course, Denmark said no. He, of course, got involved, the military got involved in the US in Iran. And, of course, now we're seeing Trump firing shots across the bow of Canada. Now, let's just take those three countries for a moment. You have, of course, Venezuela, which was Maduro, and of course he's now been removed. We've got Iran, and of course Trump versus the Ayatollah. And of course now we've got Trump and Canada. He was having a go at Greenland, but NATO pretty much put an end to that because an attack on one of the North Atlantic treaty countries is an attack on all countries. France and Great Britain, of course, voiced their disapproval of Greenland, and Trump had to cease and desist. But I think it was a bit of a smokescreen because now, of course, he's gone after the jugular of Canada. Now, what you really have to understand here and what the play is and the setup is, just so you understand and why you begin to understand why it's important that you need to have these kinds of commodities, is that Venezuela, Canada and Iran share something in common, if you're not aware. They're in the top 4 largest oil reserves on the planet. Now, I'll give you the top 4 so you understand the state of play. Number 1 is Venezuela by orders of magnitude with ocean-based oil. Number 2 is Aramco or Saudi Aramco, which is Saudi Arabia. They are number 2. Now, of course, the United States never touches Saudi Arabia. Now, we are often always wondering why that might be, since everything else in the Middle East apart from Israel is up for grabs. So, of course, the US leaves Saudi Arabia alone, and that's primarily because of the petrodollar and the deal that was done in 1974. So that keeps the US dollar in the reserve vaults of 60% of the Bank for International Settlements subsidiary central banks. Then, of course, Iran, which is the third biggest, Canada, my apologies, is the third biggest oil reserves on the planet. And of course, followed by Iran. Let me just say those top 4 again, just in case you didn't get that there. You have number 1, Venezuela, number 2, Saudi Arabia, number 3, Canada, and number 4, Iran. Wow. Any shock horror here at all? Please tell me if you've had a bit of a shock horror moment. I certainly didn't. In fact, I was filing my nails, absolutely terribly unsurprised that these were all major oil nations at a time when silver, of course, was being truncated by the Chinese. So this is the state of play. So it looks like the US are forming a kind of a ring around these countries of Canada, Iran, and Venezuela for the purposes of course, oil, which means here's what it could mean. It could mean that the United States has a great fear that Saudi Arabia could join the BRICS group. Now, why would that be important? It is immeasurably important. I cannot overstate the importance or understate the importance of how critical it is that for the United States that Saudi Arabia does not join BRICS. Well, we already know that the Saudi Central Bank has been working together with the Bank for International Settlements, which has recently left Project Enbridge. But there are a bunch of countries working on Project Enbridge, which is the bridge across from the old currency system to the new central bank digital currency system that will drive the BRICS group. Now, Saudi Arabia are involved in that. And for a brief period of time, they were just for a moment considering joining BRICS, but they had to, of course, cease and desist and stand down. Now, the US is obviously preempting the movement of Saudi Arabia to the BRICS group. And when that happens, my belief is that's the end of the petrodollar. Why? Because the petrodollar can only exist as long as Saudi Arabia are willing to trade oil in US dollars. But to join BRICS, you can't use US dollars. The point of being in the BRICS group is you cannot support the US dollar. That is why 10 nations that are already part of BRICS do not currently support the US dollar. They do in part, and they do historically. For example, China holding US bonds and US debt. But the point here is that to join BRICS, you have to go through something called de-dollarization. Now, Saudi Arabia were to do that. That means that they wouldn't be selling oil in USD. Now, the question is the US Treasury, is the administration, are they already aware that this is a potential move by Saudi Arabia? Hence why they are looking to take over the biggest oil reserves in the world. Now, the United States, is already one of the biggest producers of oil and barrels of oil, but their oil reserves are by no means the biggest. And they, of course, in order to be able to produce huge amounts of oil, you've got to have huge oil reserves. And of course, they could in the future rely on the Venezuelan oil, the Iranian oil, the Canadian oil. The question is how likely, the one in the group that's the odd one for me, of course, is Iran. Iran is already a member of the BRICS group, my dear friends. Let me go through the countries that are currently signatories to the BRICS alliance. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Egypt, Ethiopia, the United Arab Emirates, Iran, and Indonesia. These are the countries that are already moving towards de-dollarization and looking to Project Enbridge for the potential solution for a currency that's going to trade within that group. In addition, of course, there are 44 countries that will eventually make up the BRICS alliance. 44 countries. Isn't that an interesting number? 44 countries was the exact number of countries that signed the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944 in the June, which of course led to the US dollar becoming the world reserve currency pegged to gold at $35 per troy ounce. But one of the big things that I believe people have missed here is the repatriation of gold by the Germans. Now, why would this be important right about now? Why would this affect anything? Well, first of all, you've got to understand that the US dollar pretty much exists on three levels. One is militarily, through force. The second is through the petrodollar trade. And the last one is something called a confidence trade, and that is just your confidence to use it. Well, when you get countries like Germany that want to repatriate gold, what they're saying is we are not confident in the US dollar any longer. Now, this is catastrophic for the US because, of course, he who holds the gold holds the power. Now, have we ever seen a country before do this? And the answer is yes, we have. In fact, we have a very good example, and it would have been France in the 1960s. 1963 to 1968, the French repatriated a fair amount of gold from the United States using merchant navy and, of course, using aeroplanes to bring it back from the US to France because under the Bretton Woods Agreement, a central bank could request convertibility of US dollars to gold at any point. Now, of course, that was under Charles de Gaulle. And then, of course, we had the Apollo moon landings in 1969. I just want you to listen to this very carefully because this is a critical part of the story. You have 1963 to 1968, the repatriation of a fair amount of gold to the French. Now, not all the gold, because, of course, there was still a little bit more to come back and get later on, and I'll mention that in a second. Then in 1969, you have this random act of going to the moon. In the middle of the Vietnam War, in the middle of the Cold War, in the middle of the French, the biggest thing that was happening at the time is de Gaulle wanted the gold. They didn't want US dollars. This is major for the United States. But suddenly we have a moon landing. Why is this important? It's because just after the moon landing, and this was the Apollo program that went for several years, and apparently it became really important that man went to the moon. And whatever your beliefs on that are, I'll leave that to you guys. Personally, I find the whole thing extremely questionable, but mainly due to the timing is really important to look at the timing because that was in the July of 1969 that we landed on the moon. And then, of course, not long after that, in the August of 1971. Now, this is an interesting timeline. So everybody's watching the moon landings and they're, everybody's enthralled and taken aback by space travel and the advancements, but nobody's watching the US dollar. Nobody's watching what's going on because, of course, the United States was still the world reserve currency. The world's still under the Bretton Woods Agreement. But the French were watching. And the French had largely had enough. They were pretty much done and dusted. Just a moment. So, in the August of 1971, a little known fact, the French sent a warship into the harbour at New York, and they parked it in the harbour and they turned the gun turrets around and said, all right, we really would like the rest of our gold back. Now, the question is, why did the French send a warship into the harbour in New York in the August of 1971? The answer to that is because obviously the United States, the administration was not going to give the gold back, because otherwise you would just send an ordinary commercial aeroplane to go and get the gold. But obviously there was some hanky-panky going on, and the US administration was not very keen to give the gold back to the French, but the French took it back regardless of what the administration wanted. So they sent their warship in there and they basically took back the gold that was rightfully their own. They repatriated it. And literally a week and a half to 2 weeks after that was August 15. Out comes the Republican President Nixon, and he rips up the Bretton Woods Agreement in front of the world and says, it's done. We're not doing this 26-year-old system anymore. Countries are free to depeg. They're now free floating currencies. They don't have to peg to the US dollar, and they can do what they like. And the first thing that happened, which people are unaware of, is around about the December of 1971. So this is just a few months after the tearing up of the Bretton Woods Agreement. What does the US administration do under the guidance of Richard Nixon? He had the power under the Gold Reserve Act to alter the price of gold. Now, it's rarely happened in history. Contrary to popular belief, you've got to understand that US presidents have almost never repriced gold. In fact, there are only 2 US presidents who have only ever really repriced gold. One of them was Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1934 in the January, when he moved gold from its 100-year $20.67 an ounce to $35 an ounce, and he debased the US dollar by 59%. Whilst doing so, the only other president to do it under the Gold Reserve Act was Richard Nixon. In the December of 1971, he moved it from $35 to $38. Now, the reason I suspect he did this is because they just lost a certain portion of gold out of their vault and given it back to the French under repatriation. The other reason, of course, he did it is to devalue the US dollar just a little bit further, because that's all that would have happened here, but only by maybe 5%, 4 or 5%. Then Richard Nixon, of course, in the 1973, again in around about the August of 73, repriced gold one more time. And it's the last time in history it was ever repriced to $42.22 an ounce. And the reason all of this is important is because the French wanting to repatriate their gold is very similar to the Germans wanting to repatriate their gold. Different times, different periods, but we now have another moon landing. We haven't been back to the moon since basically 1972, 1973, I think was the last Apollo mission, somewhere there, maybe late 1973. There were a bunch of these Apollo missions, about 5 or 6 missions that between 69 and 73. Now, of course, but the big one was 69. Once we went to the moon and landed on the moon, people pretty much got over it. But my point here is, all of a sudden, what do you have? You've got another moon landing. And what do you have? You've got the Germans wanting their gold back under repatriation. And what do you have? You have the US dollar in a world of trouble. a world of trouble. How can you tell? Well, the first and obvious sign is that gold has skyrocketed. Gold is 5,100 US dollars an ounce as of the recording of this video. And silver, which is considered to be the money of the people and the poorer sister of gold, has had about a 250 to 260% upside in about over a year, and it hit 118 US dollars this evening. Now, this tells you everything about the state of the US dollar. This tells you that the markets are moving to risk off to safe haven. This tells you that people would rather park their dollars and their faith and their confidence in real assets than worthless fiat currencies like the US dollar. And we also know that Davos, which is of course where the World Economic Forum has just met. Davos was the scene of Donald Trump, of course, talking up a storm about Greenland and Canada and everything else. That was also, they talked a lot about climate change and their sustainable goals for the 2030 agenda. And of course, Christine Lagarde, the head of the European Central Bank, has come out talking about the move to central bank digital currencies in 2026. This is the perfect setup for commodities to run. How far will commodities run? How far will silver run? How far will gold run? It's almost impossible to say. Between 1968 and 1980 in the United States, gold moved from 35 US an ounce to 800 US an ounce. That was over a 12-year period. Now, we've just watched silver take about 50 years to reach $50 US an ounce, and then within 2 months it doubled, and more than doubled. It went from 50 US an ounce up to 118 tonight, and it's going to keep running. We literally watched as silver every 30 minutes or so, 35 minutes, jumped another dollar and another dollar and another dollar. This was when the US markets opened, and it went haywire. And there's nothing stopping it because, of course, we've now seen that JP Morgan have pretty much walking away from this whole COMEX silver short positions that they've been using to manipulate the price of silver forever and a day. Now, of course, without that, without the silver shorts in ETFs, it means that silver is going to go to its actual nominal price, which, in my opinion, could see it somewhere between 250 an ounce to anything up to about 12,000 US an ounce. Now, people say to me, that is insane, that is ridiculous, how on earth could you say that? Well, if the US dollar fails enough and it falls far enough, then that's exactly what could happen, because we could end up in a hyperinflationary environment. This is where the currency devalues by 100% every month. So every month you see another 100%. And people say, well, how can a currency devalue by 100% every month? Doesn't it just devalue by 100% and that's it? No, it's the doubling of prices is what we call the collapsing of the currency. And as a result of that, it pushes commodities higher because you need more of this currency to be able to access the assets, the physical gold and silver. These were always the assets to be in, always. For my entire time I've been on this channel, we are major in silver positions. Bitcoin is, of course, the other one, and Bitcoin is a diversified digital asset, decentralized. Yes, it is monetary, regardless of your perspective. It is a monetary asset. It's part of the strategic Bitcoin reserve. The operative word is strategic. You need to understand that the word strategic was not by accident. It was put there because the US government wanted to hold Bitcoin to make sure that their adversaries didn't have it. Everything that the US government and the administration is doing right now screams the end of the Bretton Woods system to me. Now, they're not on the gold standard anymore, so they can't rip up any contracts. But what they are on is the petrodollar standard, the confidence standard, and their militarized standard. But the problem for the United States, and I've mentioned this previously, is they haven't been in any major wars in the last couple of 100 years where, in fact, they haven't been in any major wars where they were the world reserve currency. They were not the world reserve currency in the Great War, the First World War, and they were not the world reserve currency in the Second World War. So the United States have never been in a world war where they were the world reserve currency. Don't you find that rather fascinating? Yet during the Second World War, they were one of the largest manufacturers of armaments on the globe, but they were not the world reserve currency until the end of the Second World War. And at the end of the Second World War, we saw the creation of the United Nations, which of course took over from the League of Nations, which was dissolved in 1939. So the UN, the UN, when it was created so that countries could create peace around the globe. And in order to ratify that peace, they created an additional arm of the UN called the UN Security Council. And on the UN Security Council, there are 5 nations that are pretty much empowered and have been since 1945. And this is why world wars are virtually impossible. It's because what you've got, and now I'm not saying local skirmishes can't happen, but what I am saying is world wars, global warfare is very difficult because of the UN Security Council. Forget about NATO. That pretty much just looks after countries in the North Atlantic. That is problematic, and that does prevent conflict. But it's really the UN Security Council that's the big one that prevents global conflict. And we haven't seen it since 1945. We haven't seen it since we've had the UN Security Council. And the thing that makes the UN Security Council so critical is the fact that there are 5 countries with full veto power: United States, the United Kingdom, France, Russia, and China. These countries all have full veto power. That is why you never see war between any of the 5 UN Security Council countries, apart from the fact that, you see it in the media, US could invade Russia or Russia could invade. It's garbage. I mean, they have full veto power. They're never going to do any such thing. And again, the US hasn't been involved in any major conflict since it's been the world reserve currency. So this is really interesting to know stuff. But what it says to me is that the next reset is not going to be a conflict reset. It's going to be probably more based around the transition from the old fiat systems into a brand new value system. This is, in my opinion, where all this is likely to go. So in other words, it's going to be more like an economic warfare. And I think you're going to have the factions of the East and the West, the BRICS alliance, and of course, largely Commonwealth nations and Europe over on the other side, heavily based on which currency, we don't know. US dollar, of course, can transition to stablecoin being neutral position, of course, a very, very neutral position. But stablecoin suffers from the problem that it requires backing of the US dollar. So if the US dollar were to collapse, the whole world is going to experience major change. For example, the International Monetary Fund's special drawing rights. All of a sudden, poof, it doesn't have US dollars anymore within that currency. Most likely, if the US dollar falls over, you won't see, there's a lot of other currencies that are in that basket right now that would suffer. The British pound, for one. The euro, most definitely, would suffer. The Japanese yen and the Chinese renminbi. These currencies would suffer. So the US dollar is critical to this system continuing the way it has done since Bretton Woods. But to be totally honest, the US dollar has no value anymore. And if it has no value and it can't really return anything through its bond system and its treasury system to countries that are invested, then why on earth would you want to hold this thing? If the only reason you're holding it is to buy oil, well, then your options are buy oil from someone else. Don't buy it through Saudi Arabia, Aramco. Maybe just buy it from Venezuela. But oh no, China tried that and the US stepped in and said, no, you're not doing that. Because we need all oil denominated in USD, not Bitcoin or whatever other currency they were trading in. And the other problem, of course, for the world right now is that US dollars still make up a large portion of the currencies that sit within the central bank system. Around about 60% of the total pool of currencies that sit in the reserve vaults of the Bank for International Settlements subsidiary central banks is USD. Then you've got about 20% of currency within the vaults of these central banks is in euro. So the euro would probably be the next biggest currency on the planet next to the USD. Then, of course, you have the last 20% is made up of a collection of British pound and yen, and of course also the Chinese yuan / renminbi. So I guess what this really means for a monetary guy like myself and a commodities guy is that all I see from here is that the world is splitting down the middle like a piece of timber. On one side, you have the Western Alliance, which are going to try to continue to do things in the way that they've been doing them pretty much since Bretton Woods. I don't think that system works. Gold is largely unaccountable, of course. Even though gold gives you power and gold gives you credibility, it's also hellishly unaccountable. For example, we've spoken before about Fort Knox, Kentucky, 1937, set up as the gold, as apparently meant to house a fair portion of the 8,000 metric tons of US gold, but nobody can actually tell us whether that's true or false, and nobody's ever bothered to look, apparently, and all of the audit reports have gone missing. So I guess that really, in the end, the world is going to change, and it's going to change to something completely new and something completely different. Not because we need it, probably more because it has to, because the US dollar is struggling. It is going to struggle. It's an old kind of system. The US dollar has virtually no buying power since the inception of the Federal Reserve in 1913. And it now trades, you can see with the spot price of gold up at about 5,100 USD, coming from its original spot price of $20.67 back in 1913. The US dollar is basically trading at a zero value, and it's down to confidence trades. It's down to military, it's down to confidence trades. It's trading courtesy of the fact that it is a petrodollar, which was a deal done between Kissinger and, of course, the Saudi prince in 1974, which was a little bit of a handshake agreement. But my point here is silver is running. Silver is running harder than I have ever seen silver run. It is melting faces. It is going to double from here. My estimation is we will see 250 US an ounce very, very shortly. Very shortly. If it keeps running like this, you could see it within a month. That sounds crazy. That means you're going to get a bigger than a 2x move on silver. Gold will continue to run up to 7,000 US will be its next position. It'll run to 7,000 US an ounce. And then when the markets start to shift a little bit, you will see assets like Bitcoin start to move. Now, people have been concerned about Bitcoin primarily because Bitcoin doesn't have the same properties as gold and silver, and also it doesn't have the same history as gold and silver. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, Bitcoin is a 16-year-old asset, 17-year-old asset, whereas gold and silver are as old as time itself. And of course, we've also got the silver to gold ratio, and silver went from about 85 to 1 against gold, now down trading under 50 to 1 against gold. And this means that at some point we're going to see and experience something called convertibility. So we're going to start converting silver over to gold as the market starts to see the gold ratio come down to about, silver to gold, probably around about under 30 to 1, getting closer to 20 to 1. You're going to see people swapping silver out for gold, which will actually be good because we can actually get some silver back into the mix when that happens. But we do have some serious shorts on silver. In my own country, in Australia, I'm actually in Europe recording this at the moment, but in my own country in Australia, we have massive shorts on silver. Some of the mints, in fact, one of our mints is virtually not supplying at the moment. Silver, as a few of the bullion companies are completely out. And it's just the most incredible time to see what's going on with silver. If you are trying to access silver and you do live in Australia, my own company, BTR Bullion, can provide silver. We can get access to silver. We are delivering in about 4 to 5 weeks is roughly where we're sitting at the moment. So if you are looking for commodities, then and you're looking for silver, we can get you 999 investor grade silver within 4 to 5 weeks, which is remarkable at the moment, considering the state of the markets. So I just wanted to jump in here today or tonight and just to give you a quick update on where everything is at, because let me tell you, silver is the asset to hold. It always was, it always has been, it always will be. Gold, of course, is a great substrate, and Bitcoin for your diversified positions. Bitcoin you must have, because you will understand, you may not get it now, but when the markets shift to risk on, you're going to need Bitcoin in your possession. And what worries me is Bitcoin's going to have a breakout move, which is going to prevent you from buying the asset. I do not see Bitcoin going further to the downside. I mean, it could have a marginal dip here, but really where I see the movement of Bitcoin is to the upside. That's really where I see Bitcoin moving to somewhere between 3, 5, 10 X on its current position, depending on how quickly these markets reposition and reprice, and depending on how volatile they become. But currently they're in a safe haven. People are, as I said, the sentiment in the big end of town is really to move to assets of real value, and that of course puts you straight back into gold and silver. That's really where everything is at the moment. Well, that's it for me. The guy in the hat. Again, if you need silver, you need gold, btrbullion.com.au, btrbullion.com.au. That is the quickest way for you to get silver and, well, not so much gold, but silver. We are suppliers of gold, but it's really silver that's the big issue at the moment. So if you're looking for silver, that's where you can get it. In the meantime, I hope you're well. I hope you enjoyed this update, and look after your family, look after your health, and as always, make good choices.